I want to welcome the Sinn Féin motion, the opportunity to discuss in the House yet again the cost of living and the impact it's having on people in this country. And I know tomorrow Social Justice Ireland will be giving a presentation in the AV room. I think it'd be well worth going to that. They always have very sharp analysis of what's actually happening to people at the very bottom of our society, because it is a measure that often gets ignored when we look at the figures that are churned out by the government, and we are still in a cost of living crisis. According to the RSI, average household expenditure has more than tripled since the start of 2021. That's in 4 years. Has anybody seen tripling of their wages or their income or their social protection finances in 3 years? No, they haven't. And in order to keep the wolf from the door and to keep your head above water, those at the bottom cannot really continue to carry this burden of increases in their cost of living. According to a Oireachtas research, almost 40% of adults in Ireland believe that their financial situation has worsened even more since the beginning of 2023. And this is reflected in many of the cutbacks that families face. And Oireachtas also finds that 60% of parents say that their wages just about cover the monthly expenses: rent, mortgage, utilities, groceries, childcare, with little or no money left for social activities, savings or emergencies. And those social activities include sports and leisure and external educational for children. We need appropriate government intervention and implementation of price controls, especially when it comes to the necessities in life. And this is one of the necessities in life. This government has the legal power to impose an order, but refuses to use it, because it would appear that controlling prices would mean that the profits of large energy companies and private institutions in control of the necessities in society will have to take a hit. And we can't tolerate that, can we, Minister? It's clear that this government is a slave to the belief that it cannot interfere in the market, and the result has been a governing approach that takes little account of the social issues and suffering, as more and more families find the further price increases unmanageable. And especially considering that we in this country give multinational corporations all sorts of tax breaks, monetary incentives to operate and stay in this country, we should at least make sure that cost of living crises do not get worse for the majority of the population. Instead, what we are seeing are significant increases in energy prices over the years. The government claims that increases in gas and electricity prices are due to market forces, but instead of properly regulating the energy sector or even taking key energy companies into public ownership to run them on a not-for-profit mandate, the government has instead bailed them out over the last 2 years by giving households energy credits. Remember the day when we ran the ESB on a not-for-profit mandate? Remember the revenue it returned into the Exchequer? And we had the lowest energy costs for households in Europe. But it appears that the government has enough money to subsidise large private energy suppliers, but not to help its citizens. The government already increased petrol and diesel price in April, and again planned increases in August and October. And it will be entirely due to the government imposing unnecessary taxes on working people and families already struggling to meet these ends. Make these ends meet. The planned restoration of the fuel excise duty is a cruel and unnecessary practice, especially when this government is already making a lot of money from corporation tax and running budget surpluses over the last 2 years and potentially again this year. In the current economic environment, I wonder, Minister, if it's absolutely necessary to reinstate the excise duty on fuel, and what are the benefits of its implementation this year? Have any risk assessments been done to estimate the societal impact of reinstating this tax, particularly on the poorer sections of society? And I suspect this tax on fuel will increase other cost of living overheads and make workers and families more and more at risk of poverty. Instead of imposing additional taxes on people, there should be legislative measures to cap petrol and diesel prices and implement a maximum price per litre. In fact, my party, People Before Profit, introduced a bill on energy price controls in 2022 to amend the Consumer Protection Act of 2007 to help people with rising costs, and that was, of course, rejected by the government. And I believe that instead of imposing fuel taxation, we should legislate to facilitate maximum price control. I also want to see further tax measures on the fossil fuel industry. We have been informed that the government is willing to look at additional taxes on the fossil fuel industry, but when are we going to actually see this implementation? The fossil fuel industry is not only responsible for significant environmental damage and the deteriorating climate, but it is also heavily taxed in this multi-billion euro industry. We see no reason why you need to impose a carbon tax on ordinary people. When we looked at the climate bill, I was a member of the committee and we vehemently opposed the introduction of a carbon tax on ordinary people to so-called change their behaviour. Of course, it hasn't worked. You cannot change the behaviour of people who have no choices but to get into their car if they don't have access to public services, or to heat their home if they can't afford retrofitting. But we also got a motion passed overwhelmingly by the committee that the Minister for Finance, and it was Paschal Donoghue at the time, would look into and examine the possibility of an extra tax on the profits of the fossil fuel industry to facilitate the retrofitting of homes. Do I believe that ever happened? No, I don't. But it's still on paper in that climate report, and it's still one of the motions that was passed by the majority of elected representatives, both the Seanad and the Dáil. The other issue which I continue to pursue is that of the question of free, frequent public transport. If we were to implement that, we would take so many people out of their cars. Of course, it has to be more frequent and reliable, but with a determination to do it and make it free, we could utterly change the nature of transport, the cost of living, and the atmosphere and climate and the air quality in this country. This has been a proven measure in 100 cities and locations throughout the planet, but instead the minister responsible rejects this as nonsense and says people will be making too many unnecessary journeys. In other words, they'd have nothing better to do than stay on the bus or the train all day. It's really a terrible response to what is a very sensible, modern and increasingly popular measure throughout the world. And I want to finish on this. I want to welcome and support the motion that the tax on fuel should be at least postponed, if not abolished. Too many people, including families and small businesses, are struggling to cope with the rising energy prices, and now this reinstatement of the fuel tax will make life much, much more difficult for many people. I would urge you, Minister, to reconsider reinstating that fuel tax and to properly evaluate the cost-benefit analysis of your plan and how it will affect a society. I'd also urge the Government to investigate, really take on board that motion and take on board the idea of taxing the profits of the fossil fuel industry in order to scrap the carbon tax imposed on ordinary people, but put it back on the culprit of the damage that's been done to the planet.